Are we too focused on technology? Do we leave aside human capital? Why is it essential to invest in people and to give them a tool so that they can grow and develop in the midst of the 21st century? Hasn't the moment arrived, in addition to technology, that we should focus on people and their capacity to create unique things? Today, investing in people is not an option, it's a need. People represent the main component of global wealth and also are what we call human capital. That is what we'll be discussing during this event, which has been convened by the World Bank. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. And we were speaking about human capital. You might have seen the exhibit on human capital based on the selection of Synergia of the 6 most innovative startups. Believe me, if you haven't visited it yet, it's worthwhile a visit, because this reflects what we can do with human capital here in Uruguay. I was just speaking about the importance of human capital, about the human factor. And if I look at the audience, I see it's full of young people, full of entrepreneurs. We have here business people, authorities, people from the academia. We have different agencies, people from the universities. We have the incubators. So this is really a great space to discuss this subject. But we're not alone here. Here in this audience, we have 500 people. But through the webs and through the social media of the World Bank and the media that are partners of the bank, we are also sharing this meeting with thousands of people from all over the world. So all of them are welcome. But this is a very special event because this is the very first time that a president of the World Bank visits our country. First time that he comes here. Yong will be speaking with local reference on the field of education, technology, efforts, talent. But we'll also have the opportunity of listening to him, of listening to his vision on this subject and to learn about his personal history, because this also has a lot to do with the imprint and with his vision on human factor and the relevance he gives to this. President Kim was appointed president of the World Bank in 2012. He is a physician and he's an anthropologist. All along his career, he has dedicated himself to issues relating to healthcare and education and improving the livelihood of the poorest people. So since 1997, he created a non-for-profit organization, Partners in Health. This is an organization that until today provides and cares for communities, for poor communities in 4 continents. This led him to travel throughout the world and to come in contact with the most diverse and harsh contexts and realities. Today we have the honor of having him here with us in our country. A big round of applause for him.
Gracias. Muy buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Hablo un poquito de español.
Thank you very much. I speak a little Spanish because I worked in Peru as a physician. I treated patients in very poor communities with tuberculosis. But I will speak English now, and there will be simultaneous interpretation.
Does everybody have translation? Okay. It's a great honor to be here in Uruguay. And one of the reasons I'm here is because this is a country that on the one hand has been completely committed to social justice, has been committed to distributing the wealth of the nation. And so inequality here is very low. And also the commitment to things like health and education have also been fairly strong. The Gini index, which is an indicator of inequality, is also low here. But there's, where are we, I think? Okay. The reason I'm here, and it's part of a conversation I'm having literally with the entire world, is that we're in the middle of a human capital crisis. Now, students all over the world are trying to learn. Students all over the world are trying to understand what their role might be in the global economy, but things are happening very, very quickly. Now, this is a phenomenon that's happening all over the world. By 2025, it's expected that every single human on the planet, all 8 billion people, will have access to broadband. In other words, they'll have the ability to see the rest of the world on smartphones. Now, everybody might not, I don't think everybody will own a smartphone, but everyone will have access to a smartphone. And we know exactly what happens when people get access to broadband and smartphones. First thing is, their satisfaction with life goes up. They're happy about the fact that they can communicate and they can see what's happening in the rest of the world. But the other thing that happens is their own expectations go up. That the reference income, the income to which they compare their own, goes up. And we know that if your reference income goes up, your own income has to go up for you to feel the same level of satisfaction. And so very soon, 8 years, some people say it's going to be even shorter than 8 years. Everybody will have access to broadband. Everyone will be able to at least look at a smartphone, and everyone's aspirations, everyone's expectations for themselves will go up. Now, there's lots of interesting things happening here. This is me in Rwanda launching a drone. That airplane is a drone, and in Rwanda, it delivers blood. So it used to be very difficult to get blood to every clinic in the African country of Rwanda because the roads were not very good. It was difficult to keep all the different types of blood. But with this innovation, they're now able to deliver blood to every clinic in Rwanda in a matter of minutes. And so this has revolutionized the care of people who need blood. And this example, this technology is going to spread to at least 10 other African countries right away. So technology can do great things. There's a possibility that technology can help us leapfrog generations of development and make improvements that you couldn't have imagined. But the other thing that technology will do is it will eliminate jobs. There are lots of different suggestions about how this is going to be. McKinsey suggests that 50% of all existing jobs will be gone eventually. Over the next 10 years, at least 10% of all jobs will be eliminated. But the clear trend is that most of the muscle-powered jobs are going to be gone eventually. And so the question is, what will people do who haven't had the education to take on other jobs? People who cannot build drones and use artificial intelligence to deliver blood anywhere in Rwanda. What will they do if the low-skilled jobs go away? Now, one of the really serious issues that we're facing today is the problem of childhood stunting. Childhood stunting is defined as a child less than 5 years old that is shorter than the standard by 2 standard deviations. And so these children who are shorter, this is an indication that they've not, either through lack of nutrition, lack of stimulation, or being in a toxic environment where there's violence, for example. These children have as much as 40% less brain volume. They have far fewer neuronal connections, and we know from long-term studies that they don't learn as well and they don't earn as well. The crisis of childhood stunting is much more serious than you might imagine. 155 million children in the world. But there are some countries that might surprise you. India, 38% of children have childhood stunting. 38% in Ethiopia. Afghanistan, 41%. In Pakistan, 45%. And in Guatemala, now, you know, the president of Guatemala now is working very hard to change the situation. But in Guatemala, almost 50% of children under 5 are stunted. And unfortunately, one of the assumptions that we have to make is that those children who are stunted under 5 are going to find it very difficult to compete in the digital economy of the future. Oops. Something happened. I lost something. Okay, great. All right. This is two pictures of the brains. This is from Bangladesh. This is from Professor Nelson at Harvard. On the left is a child with a stunted brain, and this is an image that just traces neuronal connections, how many connections there are. And you can see there's just this huge difference with a healthy child on the right. When you have actually fewer neuronal connections, it's very, very difficult to be able to compete. Now, it's also possible to reduce the rate of childhood stunting. Peru has had great success in reducing childhood stunting by half in only about 6 or 7 years. So what we know is that if you put all the different policies together that are needed to reduce it, it can be done. But what I'm saying is right now, with rates of childhood stunting close to 40%, in countries like India, close to over 40%, in some of the most populous countries in the world, the question we have to ask is, what are these young people going to do when they enter the job market? Because by then, we might find that most of the low-skilled jobs are gone, that they'll be competing in a world that they're not prepared to compete in. Now, the crisis is not just in childhood stunting. There's also a crisis in education. Our World Development Report in 2018 found that 250 million children around the world cannot read or write despite having been in school. In India, 3/4 of third graders could not solve a 2-digit subtraction. By 5th grade, half the students still could not. In Brazil, the skills of 15-year-olds have improved, but at the current rate, they won't reach the average rich country scores in math for another 75 years. So Brazil has to quickly improve the quality of its teaching. And worst of all, there's almost 265 million children around the world who aren't even in school. And we know now from studies that have done, especially at OECD, the PISA test, the Program for International Student Assessment, we know that the performance on the PISA exam is directly correlated with economic growth. Now, in looking at the crisis in education, our World Development Report set out 3 goals for every educational system in the world. The first thing is you have to test. You have to assess education. You have to make it a very serious goal that it's not just children in schools, but it's children learning. And it requires a much different approach than, frankly, most developing countries take. The other thing is that once you have the evidence of the schools that are the students who are learning or not learning, the schools who are teaching it or not teaching, you've got to act on that for learners. In other words, you have to ensure that every educational system is not organized for the benefit of, for example, teachers or administrators or anyone else. Schools have to be organized for the benefit of learners. And so many schools still are organized for the benefit of teachers and administrators as opposed to for the learners. And finally, all the different actors have to work together. To have an educational system, it has to start from the very top and go all the way down to the classroom in the most rural areas. Now, how important is investing in people in terms of economic growth? And this is a question now that we're trying to ask much more seriously than ever before. And we can because we have so much better data than we've ever had before. We just recently released a report called The Changing Wealth of Nations. And in the past, the wealth of nations was really based on mostly just productive capacity, meaning how many factories, roads, things that can actually produce growth that built. The built infrastructure is what we looked at. A few years ago, we started looking at natural capital, meaning the natural resources that you have. And then this year, for the first time, we looked at human capital. And in looking at human capital, we found that 65% of all the wealth in the world is in human beings. And it's the first time that we've done this study. It was extremely striking. And that number is highest in the rich countries and, of course, much, much lower in the poor countries. This is a very important study because we need to make the case with every single leader that the investment in human beings is probably the most important investment you can make for economic growth. Now, this is a graph that shows you how much of different level of countries' wealth, the high income, the middle income, and the low income countries, how much of their wealth is made up by human capital. And you can see that in the high income countries on the right, a far greater proportion is human capital. And look at how low the levels of human capital are in middle and low income countries. Now, we're desperate to bring everyone's attention to the problem of investing in human beings. And so we have asked the question, if you take the number of years of schooling and then discount it by looking at the quality of learning in those schools, and again, we have much better data on the quality of learning in schools, and then also discount it by the quality of health. So health also affects your ability to learn, affects your ability to build human capital. And if you take all the factors and then ask the question, what's the difference between the group of countries that have improved human capital the most when you compare them to the countries that have improved human capital the least? And the answer was really striking. So on the right, far right, are the countries that improved human capital the most. So in the countries that improved human capital the most, the top 25%, they grew economically over the past 15 years 1.25% of GDP per year, 5 years, faster than those who improved it less. This is one of the strongest correlations we've ever seen to economic growth. And so it becomes even more powerful. And what we do, we're going to rank the countries. So in October, we're going to come out with a ranking on how countries are doing in terms of human capital. And it's going to be very controversial. There are going to be many countries who don't like where they come out in the ranking, but we feel that it's just critical to make it clear to everybody that investing in human capital and doing it on emergency footing right now is important. Now, this will require fundamental transformations in school systems. You know, one of the things that we found is that the high-performing school systems like the Singapore school system, that when you get to the end of your secondary school years, in Singapore, if you've been to school for 12 years, your learning is appropriate for 12 years. But then in other countries, Ghana, Malawi, Yemen, and Ghana is now a middle-income country, the equivalent schooling that children who go all the way through secondary school, 12 years of schooling, get is 5 years less. So it's about half the amount of schooling. So these school systems are performing half as well as the best school systems in places like Singapore. Now, Latin America also has a problem. Across the region, 1 in 5 young people, more than 20 million young people aged 15 to 24, are out of work or out of school. Nearly 60% of them come from the poorest 40%, and nearly half of the 15-year-old students in Latin America are below the minimum proficiency level on the PISA exam. 45 here in Uruguay, 45% of the poorest children in Uruguay finished the first half of secondary school, but only 11% of the poorest students finished secondary education completely. And by their adolescent years, 18% of Uruguayan teenagers have already dropped out of school entirely. And also only 38% of Uruguayans finish university, which is much lower than neighboring countries. And over 60% of primary school students perform poorly in areas like math. So the World Bank has been providing loans for education, and we've been able to benefit 80,000 students, 4,000 teachers, but there's still a long way to go. As I said before, Uruguay is a tremendous example in many areas, but the economy is changing. There's a leader in the technology world that we've spoken to, And this leader in the technology world has told us, and he says this before every speech, he says, today is the slowest day for innovation you will ever experience again for the rest of your lives. Every day, things are changing. And so Uruguay, like every other country, is going to have to move in terms of catching up with the best school systems like the ones in Singapore, South Korea, and others. So there's a lot of good news in the area. Peru spent 18% of its budget on education, 4% of GDP, and their PISA test outcomes have actually improved. In fact, one of our World Bank economists was Minister of Education during a time of great improvement in the Peruvian school system. Vietnam invests significantly in education, over 18% of budget, 6% of GDP on education in Vietnam. And Vietnam, in the 2012 PISA test, the international test, Vietnam came out at the same ranking as Germany. So this caused a lot of concern in Germany, and Germany began investing more in their educational system. But Vietnam was at the same level of Germany, which means that if you make the investments, if you focus on evidence-based approaches to improving education, you can improve. But it all comes back to this. This is what's happening everywhere in the world. Everyone's going to be online. Everyone's going to have access to education. Everyone's aspirations for themselves, for their children, for their families, they're going up. At the same time, the low-skilled jobs are going to be going away. And so we have no choice. We have no choice but to go forward and commit to providing every single child the opportunity to become whatever he or she wants. I always end up quoting Martin Luther King because I think the major problem today is a problem of human solidarity. And this is why I was so encouraged being here. I was so encouraged to come to a country that talks openly about the importance of solidarity, that talks openly about the importance of social justice, while at the same time trying to be successful in building a strong private sector. Martin Luther King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's never been more true than today. So if you think about these countries that have 30 or 40% childhood stunting, and you think about some of these countries that are already the breeding grounds and recruiting areas for terrorism, another thing that happens with access to the internet is that people can get recruited to extremist groups. I am extremely worried. I think the 155 million children, 30% of young people plus in large countries who are not getting access to nutrition and then not getting access to good education, those are going to be the sources of fragility, conflict, violence, and extremism in the future. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're living in that world right now, and this is why we're so glad to be here in Uruguay. You've done so much here, but also here to say that now it's time to take a next big step forward to invest in human beings so that Uruguayans, every single Uruguayan, can become anything they want, can study anything they want, and can say proudly that they come from Uruguay, a country that believes in solidarity, that believed in investing in people, and that gave them an opportunity to do great things in the world. Thanks very much.
Gracias, Presidente Kim. Sin duda, se deben haber quedado pensando, reflexionando.
Thank you, President Kim. I'm sure everyone has been reflecting on these words, or you might reflect on these later on, or concerns that will arise, as well as the opportunities that arise when putting this topic on the table. Let me remind you that this is being live streamed in Facebook Live of the World Bank at World Bank Lat, and the live platform bancomundial.org. With us are also the members of the World Bank, Spain, Observador from Uruguay, economist from Central America, American Economía, the World Economic Forum, and Forum Plata. If you wish to join the conversation, if you wish to share your ideas, you can follow us and join us through the social media with the hashtag Invertir en la Gente. It's worthwhile, so we continue enriching the debate and the standpoints. Now, in an event in which we speak about human factor, it is essential to have players who make decisions every day regarding human capital. I'm thinking about education, I'm thinking about the companies, the incorporation of technology, and which is the best way to make use of this. And to a certain extent, that is what we are going to consider with the panel we will have today. We'll be focusing on how to better invest in people and society so that we can provide quality education and the necessary tools to compete in the 21st century. What do we lack in Uruguay to compete in the world? How can we grow? We have many entrepreneurs here. You are the ones who have to overcome all the barriers. So it is worthwhile focusing on what we need to continue growing and competing in the best way possible regarding human capital. I would like to ask a big round of applause to welcome the members of the panel, Miguel Bresner, President of the Ceibal Center and Engineer in Communications. Serafín Delfino, psychologist from PwC. She welcomed Geraldine. Adriana Astimuño, professor of the Catholic University of Uruguay, researcher and co-founder of EDU Y21, an initiative that was created to promote debates that leads to profound transformations in education. And once again, the president of the World Bank, Kim Jong-kim. It is a pleasure to be sharing this panel with you. To start with, I would like to start with the locals. Do you think we are facing a human capital crisis in Uruguay? How do you see this? Yes, no, or why? Instead of discussing whether we are in the midst of a crisis, because it is what we eternally do in Uruguay, I think I prefer to say what we're doing and what we want to do, because the 21st century is totally different from the 20th century. What we have to stop and think is what kind of education and training do we want to give our people. The child who went to first grade in school will be graduating in 2030. So this will be a totally different world, because 2007 is totally different to today. So it's quite simple. We have to educate them in values, in critical thinking. We have to educate them in citizenship. We have to educate them in creativity. We have to generate another way to make students advance to this new world. And this new world is based on the skills and competencies of the 21st century, not of the past centuries. We are working intensively in 400 educational centers in what we call the learning network with the education authorities, and these are values and the path we wish to follow. Adriana. I see that there are two aspects. One is more positive and auspicious, and the other one is more negative and cause for concern. Uruguay has a very auspicious situation from the economic point of view, the Gini index, social integration, equality in society, the enormous resources that have been invested in education. This has brought about many improvements. We have smaller groups in primary school. We have better salaries that are paid to the teachers. So there are good news in the human capital scenario in Uruguay. Now, when we look at the achievements of the educational system in that scenario with those resources, this is cause for concern. So last March, more than 300,000 children began primary school in Uruguay. 100 of these students are followed up with the results. And these children, in 12 to 15 years' time, will see that when they are 17, only 70 of the 100 who began will remain. There will be middle higher education, only 31 by age of 19 and 40 by the age of 20. So those are the official numbers, and compared to the rest of the region, these are very poor numbers. We are also aware, and Dr. Kim referred to the fact that we have problems in learning achievements. Primary school results are very bad. The national tests are not good. We haven't been able to increase the number of average years, 8 to 9 years. In the rest of Latin America, these numbers are improving. And the new PISA results are not good. Most of the students don't achieve the minimum skills in mathematics. 52% is in the levels -1 and 1 of the 6 levels, and 40% don't have the necessary skills in language and science. So these are things that, when thinking about the globalist world and the challenges that we have to face, and with wonderful things such as the Ceibal Plan and the Innovation and Research Agency of Uruguay, so considering all that, the educational system is not producing what we expect in order to face the challenging world we have ahead.
Following what my colleagues have said here in the panel, we in our practice have been suffering this on a daily basis. Like President Kim said when he insisted on education, we are not finding the necessary talent or the necessary skills. And I'm not referring to technical skills, but also to soft skills. Values, I'm talking about capacity to learn, teamwork, leadership, capacity to unlearn and learn again, innovation. So for a long time we've been insisting that we need to match the three main stakeholders at the level of society with a strong commitment across state, education system from the primary level to tertiary and university level, and third stakeholder, the private enterprises or the public enterprises. The three stakeholders should get together and focus. We have many prognoses, we have many baseline studies, but we already know what the needs are, what the gaps are. We are constantly hearing about the speed of technology on a daily basis. We are thinking about the work we will be doing by 2030. So I think that we need to start doing something today. We have so many plans, so many policies, but we need to really bring them down to earth. And I believe that the three parties in the country, the state, the institutions and the private and public sectors in enterprises should get together. We need to start working. This is a commitment we must undertake. I also believe that we cannot always blame the public, the private or the state. That's not good. I think the household, the family, is necessary to build values, and this is where we see problems also. Unfortunately, the news reveal situations like teachers being hit by parents, and there's violence, and that's very serious. That's a source of concern, and we need to work on that. These values start within the family, which is the primary core, the household. If we don't work these values at the level of family, we are getting into high water. In this context, President Kim, do you see opportunities to invest in human capital in the case of Uruguay?
So there, the important thing to I think understand is that, first of all, it's an honor to be on the panel with all of you. I mean, I think there's clear you have a deep understanding of what is happening in Uruguay. And I don't think I have anything to teach you about Uruguay, but maybe I can give you a little bit of a perspective on what we're seeing out there in the world. So to give you an example, in the country I was born in Korea, the average number of hours of school per day is 15. So they start at 7 in the morning and they go till 11 o'clock at night. And one of the reasons that women don't participate very much in the workforce is that they feel that they have to spend full time managing the education of their children. So any resources that are left over, they invest in tutoring after school. In China, it's the same thing. It's a race to see who can get their children into the best tutorial programs. And so I don't know why it's happened that way, but in many East Asian countries, the families are the one that drive this. And the children say that we're suffering terribly. They hate having to go to school so long. There's so much pressure. The adolescent suicide rate is very high compared to other countries. But those are the countries that everyone else is competing with. That's just what they're doing. And I think most people would say that that's too much. That's just too harmful for young people. They should pull back on that. But what I see is that the Korean school system, the Chinese in Shanghai, Singapore, what they are it's a sort of a determination and grit building system. Right? So some people say, well, the things we're learning are not very important and we're memorizing too many things. Well, actually, that's not such a bad thing. You have to memorize things if you want to be creative. You have to have some things in your head before you can really be creative. And so I think that what might be helpful for Uruguay is to just take a look around at some of the best systems in the world and where they're going and the innovations that have brought. So, for example, I was president of a university before coming to the World Bank Group, and we had some of the best scholars, psychologists, who were studying the human learning process. Really brilliant. The person who did all the definitive studies on how children learn to read was at Dartmouth. The people who looked at how students learn anything. And I asked them, are you using what you know from your research in your teaching? And the answer is no. Right? And so they were still lecturing in the sciences, which has been shown to be quite ineffective. And so even at a place like Dartmouth College that considers itself on the cutting edge of college education, even Dartmouth College wasn't using all of the innovations available in our educational process. So one of the things that we could do together, and our team is right here, is we could do a seminar for Uruguay and just bring some of the most interesting examples from around the world of countries who have made specific investments or innovations and seen really quick advancement in their outcomes. And so, the Korean system, there's so many pieces of it, but the Khan Academy in California has some of the best outcomes you've ever seen. There are private sector groups that have used the Khan Academy materials that have gotten great outcomes. I think with the SEPAL program, you've combined hardware and software in a way that's really been effective. But there are also some fantastic teachers who, if you translated them into Spanish, they would get better outcomes. I mean, the educational scholars that I spoke to said that eventually 2 people in the world will teach calculus to everybody, because calculus is very difficult to teach, and there are going to be 2 people who end up teaching it so beautifully that they'll be recorded, they'll be translated into every language, and they'll be the ones who teach the entire world calculus. I think that time is coming, and so the opportunities to take the next step, since you've done such a good job of getting hardware and software into the hands of students, if you bring also the best teachers, you could see this change. But I think, part of it is changing the culture of the family, right? So in Korea, in Shanghai, in Hong Kong, Singapore, the culture of the family is oppressive to the young people. They feel that it's oppressive, right? So somewhere between oppressive, right, and not caring, there's a right place to be. Right. And that's hard. I don't know how you do that, but that's the kind of change you're going to see. The drive has to come from within the families to get every bit of education that they possibly can.
En función de tu experiencia en la selección de talentos para diversas empresas locales. Internacionales también.
And also international companies. What are the skills that the private sector requires that are not easily found in Uruguay? Well, this is part of what I gave in my initial answer. This has to do far more with the soft skills and compared to hard skills and knowledge. Although, in terms of technology, we are coming across certain languages and programs that are not necessarily developed here, so that knowledge has not been developed here, or only very few people have these. Or also, what has happened to us is that they have one thing but not the other, so we don't really find the exact person. Now, these soft skills somehow are related to innovation, the capacity to innovate, the capacity to create, the capacity to learn and unlearn, given the incredible pace we are involved in education and progress in terms of knowledge beyond borders, in the capacity to work in teams, and to a certain extent, when we think of these skills, why is it so that we don't find these skills when we start assessing a person? So we come back to this of the education system. Is this the adequate educational system? Does the education system develop those skills so that we can really implement education that is not so much encyclopedia-based and should rather take into account the different skills that children have, and that they don't find this in one single type of education system? So maybe our system sort of narrows this down and say, well, you have to follow this path, but in the meantime, I have to do other things that I'm not so much interested in. So we have to have a flexible educational system taking into account the different interests. And that what is likely to lead to less dropout rates at school. That is a way in which we can attract children in schools, much in the same way as companies wish to attract them. The educational system also has to attract students. There are 3 to 4 generations that have practically been lost. So I think we are lacking those skills. We don't find them when we have to recruit people to cover the needs of businesses. Even businesses have sought to set up their companies in Uruguay. They have conducted the market research and they have decided to go elsewhere because here they won't cover the positions they need with the people available here. So I think this also had to do with that. So this leads me to the following question that I wanted to ask Miguel. You are someone who is in contact with technology and with education. How can you use technology so that young Uruguayans don't drop out from their studies and feel motivated and enjoy studying? Well, first of all, dropping out from school is something that is very worrying. Dr. Kim mentioned this again and again in the context of family also. 11 or 12% of the poorest quintile barely finishes middle school, secondary school. But there's a large percentage that doesn't finish secondary school. This is a social problem that we have. As a young person, if I hadn't finished secondary school, my father would have really killed me. It was unthought of not to finish secondary school because we accept that 25% of the richest quintile of society does not finish school. And we just accept it. And we don't. Diego is going to come here to speak with us, and he plays in the Uruguayan national team, but he hasn't finished secondary school. So what are the things that we are discussing here if we cannot accept this as a society, that it's important to study? everybody says that studying is important, but the reality is that this is not taken to practice. It's not done so by parents, by the politicians, in some of the laws that could really encourage people to finish secondary school. I said this at the beginning, and I'm repeating this now. We think that the only way in which we can go out of this vicious circuit of bored students is working on the base of projects to be creative in a collaborative manner, not to discuss, but to start working. We have 400 centers that are working with this methodology in Uruguay, led by the directors. This is called the Learning Network. And this Learning Network works in a cross-cutting manner based on projects. And things arise every day, which we study. And people think that this is just an isolated case. No, that is not the case. The young people who won the international contest in the town of Tala did not solve something in the field of robotics. They had to solve a real-life situation, which was how to overcome the disease of leptospirosis. So they studied the physics and the chemistry involved in this to see how they could deal with this problem, and then they prepared a robot. And when you have hundreds of thousands of students working on robotics, this will bring about a change. This won't happen overnight. This won't happen if we just sit and discuss this. We have to stop and think what is required. This year, together with primary school, we'll have 500 groups which will be working with computing. We have to decide as a country that we want to be those who program robots and not those who lose jobs as a result of robots. And these are quite evident things. These are obvious things. This is not far-fetched, but we do have to undergo changes. We have to respect teachers. We say that education is important, but on the 1st of March of 2005, a teacher earned 5,000 pesos, less than a person who does household work. So we cannot say that a domestic worker, but we really have to pay teachers. In Finland, if you are a teacher, you're up here in Korea and in Singapore, and I know about these experiences, the best are those who teach. And if I would ask the audience who have adolescent children, I say, if your children tell you, do you want to be an engineer or a teacher, what would you answer your child if these are the two options? Adriana, if it was up to you to make one major change in the Uruguayan education system, what would that be and why? Well, it's impossible to say that with one single change you would change things, because this would go against what we have been speaking about in the past years. The change in the Uruguayan education system is a systemic change, or it's not. Either it's systemic or it's not. Systemic involves all the aspects, not because I have fallen in love with a systemic theory, but we have been following educational policies in Uruguay, and we realize that there are structural issues of the governance of the educational system and how schools work. We've spoken about teachers and the curriculum and many things such as these, and these are not solved and overcome if only one change is made. Now, we have to count on the support of the teachers. If I make them work at a school where they rotate every year, if the directors are rotated every year, if they cannot work on a project that changes every year, well, this is what the situation is like today. Teachers and directors are changed every year if they wish to. So there are some things that are related to the structure of the system that have to be changed, but with a systemic approach. And secondly, we have to respect and value what we have. There are many things that are very positive. Miguel spoke about different things. He spoke about one laptop per child, the Ceval plan, online assessment, robotics, children from poor neighborhoods. So there are many, many initiatives that address these issues. There are many teachers that are innovative in their own education centers without any structural changes. So, to sum up, if we do a systemic change, that talent will flourish even more. The system will allow having far better and creative knowledge. Teachers will be able to work better and autonomously in the schools. So we really have to try and improve things, but we need to have a systemic approach. The education system in the past years has become somehow endogamic. And like Dr. Kim said, we have to really open up and learn about the very good experiences that we see in different parts of the world for all the problems that we have to solve and we have to improve. Dr. Kim, what is the role of the World Bank Group to deal with these challenges?
So, one of the things that we need to do is that we're trying to start a conversation in every country in the world about the kinds of issues that have been talked about here. Miguel, his passion for saying the culture has to change. Everyone has to value education. And so we're asking ourselves, well, how do we do that? And we know that it has to start from heads of state and heads of government, and especially from ministers of finance. Right? And so we're doing the ranking of human capital for a very specific reason. We've already talked to S&P, and this is the company that rates sovereign government bonds. Right? And I asked them, do you take into account human capital in doing your sovereign bond ratings? And they said, no, we don't have enough data. So we're going to give them data on the quality of the human capital stock, and it could actually affect a country's bond rating, meaning that the cost to the country of borrowing, and every country in the world has to borrow, could go up because you haven't invested enough in your children, and you haven't invested enough in your students. Now, I know that will get the attention of heads of state and heads of government and ministers of finance, and it has to start there. So we're going to start this conversation. Believe me, already it's very controversial. Already countries are coming and saying, please, Jim, don't do this. But what I've told them is I think it's my moral and ethical responsibility to reveal to them and to the world just how they're doing in terms of investing in their people, and then link it directly to economic growth, which will then be linked to things like how much it costs you to borrow on the global markets, and how much foreign direct investment. And if those two things happen, then I think the conversation will be different. Also, there will be some countries that'll be very surprised to find themselves ranked below countries to which they've always felt superior, right? And that will also start a different conversation. And one representative to the World Bank from a country said to me that the problem is if you do this, then the opposition parties are going to go crazy and they're going to start criticizing. And I have to say, my response was, exactly. That's exactly the conversation we want to start. Because, if everyone could be as excited about how their children are doing in school, as excited about that as how Uruguay is doing in the World Cup, then there'd be no problem. But that doesn't happen right now. And so we're going to do everything we can to push countries to have that conversation. And then after that, our role is sometimes to provide financing, but you should push us. In Uruguay, I mean, it's such an impressive discussion. I really feel like there's very little that I would have to teach you, and I was a university president. But the one thing we probably could provide is very specific case studies from all over the world that either may be useful to you or not useful to you. But that's our role. Our role is that we work in so many different countries. We're out there looking constantly for new examples. And I think that's probably the most important thing we could do. Now, I think Uruguay is going to come out doing relatively well on the human capital ranking. But again, I think there are going to be countries that Uruguay feels superior to that you may be ranked below. So I hope that we can help you have this conversation and then also formulate a response based on the best practices in the world.
A los cuatro, gracias. Les pido un fuerte aplauso para despedirlos. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Bueno, yo les recuerdo que pueden seguir sumándose a esta
You
conversación.
can join this conversation through the hashtag using the social media, and the hashtag is Invertir en la Gente. We have Facebook Live transmission at Banco Mundial LAC, and we also have El País from Spain, El Observador, Uruguay, El Economista, Central America, World Economic Forum, and Von Platte. Now, the core of this event is human factor. I think personal effort, commitment, teamwork, being able to achieve what seems to be impossible. So now I will invite President Kim, but he's accompanied by someone you already know, Diego Lugano, former leader of the Uruguayan soccer team. Let me tell you, while we wait, we have a full house. As you leave the room, visit the exhibition organized by Sinergia Incubadora with the 6 most innovative startups. You will see what is really possible with our human capital. While we wait for him, we know him. For those of you who are following the web transmission, Diego Lugano was the captain of the Uruguayan soccer team. It was difficult to get the microphone. He was a member of the Uruguayan soccer team. In 2013, he played 95 matches with La Celeste. He was the captain of the national team, and with him as captain, La Celeste obtained the 4th place in the South Africa 2010 World Cup, and then the Copa America 2011. He's from Canelones. He's been around the world playing in the main teams worldwide. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. Now you have a one-to-one, one-on-one meeting.
Thank you so much for being here. You know, I heard that you were
Thank
a
you,
little
Diego.
surprised that we invited you to come here, but we're thrilled to have you here. And again, thank you for coming all the way from Brazil to be with us.
Sí, bueno, por supuesto que estaba sorprendido porque obviamente
Of course, I was surprised because I'm in soccer. I had having a meeting with you here in the country makes me feel very proud. It's a tremendous responsibility because I'm representing athletes and sports people from my country, from the region. I was surprised at the invitation, but I'm very happy as well.
Before, there was a lot of talk about the importance of soft skills, determination, ability to work with others, leadership skills, or even being able to follow others. Now, I heard that when you were captain of these great Uruguayan soccer teams, that you actually brought those kinds of ideas. You really worked with the entire team so that as we say, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts, that because you brought those skills, the Uruguayan team got so much better. Tell me how you think about your role as captain and what you try to do to make the team work even better than even the individual players.
Sí, bueno,
Well, maybe this was overstated. I think Uruguayans, you know, tend to be quite generous in that sense. But I was fortunate of being part of a generation of sports people who are also great Uruguayan citizens and know of the enormous responsibility that it implies to represent the Uruguayan national team. So in Uruguay, soccer is very important. So this is because soccer came, we started winning the first World Cups here, the Olympics and so on. And all this leads to the fact that Uruguayan society and the spirit here and the feelings are reflected in the outcomes of the football matches, of the soccer matches. I have traveled to different parts of the world. I was in Korea several times. In Korea, people like soccer a lot, too. And we always felt this responsibility of trying to make the national team represent our citizens. Obviously, to achieve sports objectives, important sports objectives when facing other powers, which, like education, have a far more effective system of education and training, we had to add the human issues, the culture of soccer, which is something that you cannot buy. This is something that you cannot obtain paying millions. This is something that is part of us. You feel it. That is why we tried to take advantage the characteristics, the features of each member of the national team for the benefit of the entire team, to be successful in sports, but also so that the people of our country would become, I feel, identified with the way we are, with the way we play. I think our success had to do with that and not so much with the sports on it's exclusively.
Do you have examples? I mean, there must have been times when you felt that the team was in big trouble in a match or something like that. And how do you lead others? What is the way that you lead others to do more than they think that they can do? Because, you know, we just had this conversation, and what I said was that if people in Uruguay could get as excited about ensuring that their children learn in schools as they do about the Uruguayan national football team, then Uruguay would be on a different path. Because, you know, in Korea, as you said, you know, when they did well in the World Cup, the whole nation and all Koreans all over the world just went crazy. I mean, we made it to the semifinals, and no one thought that that would be even possible. But at the same time, the parents pushed their kids so hard to do well in school, and that when a young child gets admitted to a university, the entire family celebrates. How do you think that you could apply what you've done with a team to other issues? I know you've been very committed to creating opportunities for children. It's such a great thing. But if people had your leadership ability and had the performance that the Uruguayan national team had in things like education and the adoption of new technologies, Uruguay would be ahead of everybody. How could you do that?
Sí.
Well, this is very complex, and this has to do with the culture of the country. You cannot change things overnight. But yes, we did take advantage of the national team and the exposure it had in our country, and the access that we have to children in Uruguay. It's amazing. This is a way we can have contact with people. This is something not even politicians or entrepreneurs or teachers can have. So maybe they have a far better capacity to teach other things. So we felt that we had a responsibility based on example. There's no other way to transmit this passion to achieve goals, a passion to work as a team, to reach a target, a goal as a team. It's far more encouraging when you work as a team. It's not the same to achieve an objective in isolation on your own compared to do so as a team when you realize that you need each piece in that team to achieve that goal, each person with their own individuality contributing to the collective benefit. But the most interesting question that you are asking is if Uruguayan parents had the same passion to incentivize a child to become part of the national team, that they should be invested to graduate in a different area, then we would be a far better country. And we're working in that direction. We took on this responsibility as top players to transmit that concept. You know, in Uruguay, football, soccer among children is also unique. 3 years old and 4 years old already start playing soccer in the system. Many parents think that the future of the child is in soccer, but only 0.27% to become Lugano. The percentage is 0.27. You don't need to be a genius in mathematics to realize that this is very difficult. But nevertheless, many parents believe that the future of the children is in soccer, and they promote this. They encourage them to do so, and not so much to promote studying. And as public individuals that we are, we have attempted to, and we're working in this direction. We want to make parents understand that soccer is a secondary issue. Education is the top priority. And because even today, when you play at higher levels in soccer, the better the education, the better your intellectual capacity, then it is easier to become a better sportsman. So these two things go hand in hand. To be a good sportsman, you at least have to have stable knowledge and education. And that's what we're trying to convey. We are strongly committed with this.
So, Diego, you've been so successful that I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you for some advice. Okay? So at the World Bank Group, we're trying to now work much more effectively as a team. So there used to be different parts of the World Bank Group that didn't work closely together. And so now we're trying to make everyone work as a team. But there are some individuals in the World Bank Group, none of them in Uruguay, by the way, none of them here. But there are some individuals in the World Bank Group who think of their own success more than the success of the overall team. How did you deal with players who acted like that? And be very specific, because I'm going to take your advice, go back to Washington, and try to apply it.
Well, first of all, success is a very ephemeral world. What is success? It's very difficult to describe success. Each person feels success in a different way. We, players of the national team, understand success when you can convey something to someone, when a child in your country or when a parent feels identified with you, and not for achieving a given result. Now, in a soccer team, which is a totally plural and democratic work, you know, when we have a very fragmented society, and a soccer team brings people from many areas, religions, races, political standpoints, and you have in your ultimate goal the reason for being united. And in my case, always respecting the individual objectives and promoting these, feeling empathy and trying to contribute so that each individual reaches their personal objectives, but also manipulating them so that the goal is then the overall objective. So we have to pay attention to the different moves in the during the match. But we really have to respect individualism as well. Reaching a common objective should not go against with the expression of the personalities of each of the players. So you have to feel a lot of empathy to respect each individual, and indirectly or directly, each should contribute to the ultimate goal.
You know, you've now played and worked in many different societies and cultures. And so what has all that experience taught you about Uruguay? What, after seeing so many different places and cultures, what do you think is the most important challenges that Uruguay should tackle right now?
Well, fortunately, the fact that as members of the national team, we have the privilege of living in different cultures, of sharing moments with different personalities, of seeing different realities. All this leads you to value things that we have in Uruguay that you don't find in other parts of the world. Uruguay is a small country. Uruguay is a country with quite a lot of social equality compared to other less developed countries. So this leads us to value these things of our country, to love your country, and to really to work towards maintaining that in that way. Uruguay people feel a lot of solidarity. We have things in Uruguay which you don't encounter in other cultures, in other societies, which are far more dynamic or far more active, and maybe more developed societies than ours. Now today, it is quite clear that education, which is what you are dealing with, education in Uruguay is a problem. We are at a sort of standstill. I live in Brazil right now, and people speak of Uruguay as if this is a country with the highest level of education in Latin America. They speak with a lot of respect about our society in that regard. Now, internally, deep inside, we know that we have many things on the pending list. So these are things that when you are someone that is more exposed to the public, well, we really have the responsibility of encouraging things related to ethics, respect, and to encourage children to read, to study. Soccer in our country really carries a very powerful message in that sense. Maybe you don't really understand that, but we receive many letters from teachers, parents, grandparents, thanking us because their children have started to read footballs on soccer. Well, nevertheless, they are reading, or they go to school, encouraged by our advice. These are small things that we can, through which we can contribute to society, and we're working on that because I think Uruguay really needs that at this moment.
A completely different question. The Uruguayan national team will be going to Russia to play, right? And I asked, I said, is Diego going to play? And they said, no, he's retired. But you look like you're ready to play. Are you going to play in Russia? Yeah.
Que la imagen importante, hay que mantener la imagen.
Well, the image is very important. I will go to Russia, but as a guest, FIFA guest, to participate in different events. And I'm strongly in contact with the national team because it's my generation. I shared 10 years of my life with them. I was captain for 10 years, and they are strongly involved. And there are many day-to-day things in which I feel very close to them. So I feel very proud of being part of a generation that shares very noble and Uruguayan values. I will be in Russia, but now I have to go back to my team in Brazil. And I have to ask for permission to go with my national team because, you know, La Celeste, our national team, is part of our beings. I hope we won't have to play against Korea.
Well, you know, so I met with President Vasquez this morning, and you know, there has been not a single conversation I've had all day that didn't include football to some extent. And so with President Vasquez, we talked about football, and he said that when he visited Russia, he did a press conference with President Putin, right? And President Putin said, because President Putin, of course, he's really trying to build Russian soccer. I'm sure you've heard. So he said, how can such a small country have such great soccer teams, right? And President Vasquez said, oh, it's very simple, because they eat Uruguayan beef. And then he said, and because of that, you should import more Uruguayan beef to Russia, right? So I want you to know that I learned that your president is working for you all the time, and that football played a role in opening up the Russian market for Uruguayan beef. So how do you? What's your path going forward? Are you going to be a coach? Are you going to come back to Uruguay? And I mean, what are the things that you'd like to do now that you've achieved such a high level of success? I read about your life. I knew that you went through tremendous difficulties in your early life, and you stuck with it, and then had the big break when you were in your early 20s. Now what? What's next for you?
Bueno, volviendo a lo de
Going back to what President Vasquez said, he was president of a soccer team here in Uruguay. So this is to show you how football is so connected to what we do here. Historically, Uruguay started enjoying football, and when it reached good results in 2010, in Google, the word Uruguay appeared more and more, according to statistics from the Ministry of Tourism. Twice as much the world population started learning where Uruguay was located. The word Uruguay came into different markets and countries that people had never heard before. This is for you to understand how important football is for all of us. It acting like an ambassador on a daily life. And it also has its incidence in the economy. It's doing good for the country. My plans for the future, well, I'm working in Brazil for the Sao Paulo club. This is where I spent most of my career in football. I'm a director. Brazil has many projects. Brazil is a huge country. I'm close to Montevideo, so I can come here. We played yesterday. We won. I was happy and relieved. And this conversation is being streamed to Sao Paulo. There are 20 million followers and fans. Say hi to them. That is why we are ambassadors as well. And I will continue doing this as I move on into the future. I'm also connected to other social issues that I'm proud of or engaged in, and now I have to be responsible for all these things.
So, Diego, I think that the result of my trip here, I've come to conclude that that Uruguay is such an important example for the world, that we really have to do something special here, that all the commitment to building a strong private sector, making sure that inequality is reduced, making sure that growth includes everyone, creating a middle class. So many good things have happened here. And now the foundation is so nicely established that the next step is that Uruguay should become one of, like the Asian tigers, an economy that's just, barreling forward with innovation and growth. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to work with us at the World Bank Group to really push this idea of taking it forward, and especially in the area of education, because if children hear it from you, if children in Uruguay hear from you, that the most important thing for them is to have the same passion for education as they have in football, that could be very, very helpful. What do you guys think, our team? Yeah.
Voy a hacer, creo que, como decía, el deporte y el fútbol en Uruguay es un...
As I was telling you, sports and football in Uruguay are good as a mechanism. Sports need to grow. And I'm asking you for your advice. What can we do for our football to have investment, to get investment from multilateral organizations, agencies, and so on, so that we foster development and boost growth? Next time, if we play against Korea, we'll try to be kind to them. I promise you. I promise you, in return.
So let's put it this way, all right? So, Diego, if you join with us on a campaign to improve the PISA scores of Uruguay students, and once the PISA scores go up 20%, right, because of your efforts, Diego, then I will find people to invest in Uruguay football.
Solo eso.
Okay? Deal?
Pleasure.
Gracias.
Presidente Kim, no queríamos que en su primera visita a nuestro país se fuera sin la celeste firmada por un histórico.
in your first visit to Uruguay, we want you to get the T-shirt of La Celeste. The 4 stars mean 4 World Cups. It's not bad for us. No, no, no. We have 4. This is not the current one. This is the 2010 World Cup where we faced South Korea. It's true. That's why I'm signing this one with all my love. Because soccer brings people together. It's been a pleasure. And a picture with the audience. Please turn around.
Vive. Gracias.
Diego, miren para acá y sacamos con...
Aquí.
Salen todos, ¿eh? Aprétense un poquito nomás.
With the audience as well. Good afternoon and thank you.